You're listening to the Pens Nation radio show on thepensnation.com. Follow us on Twitter at @thepensnation.
What a first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs it has been. We're going to have 3 Game 7s tomorrow night, Wednesday night, as the Philadelphia Flyers defeated the Rangers tonight 5-2. They force a Game 7. They will face the Pittsburgh Penguins, the winner of that game tomorrow night between the Flyers and Rangers. Also, Avalanche Wild will face off, as well as the Sharks and the LA Kings. A lot of good hockey tomorrow night, but the Pittsburgh Penguins, they survived their series, beat the Columbus Blue Jackets a score. What else could it be? 4-3. We saw a lot of those in this series, and the Penguins win the series in 6 games, 4-2 over Columbus. A big moment even for the Blue Jackets to lose that series. They got a huge ovation after, the Penguins gave their fan base a little bit of a heart attack, you could say. And that one had a 4-0 lead. Then it went to 4-3 with, a few minutes left, and it was just had to hang on. The Penguins do, though, as we'll recap a little bit of that. This is the Pens Nation radio show. I'm Andy Hughes, joined by Nick Richter and Casey Johnson. We're also joined by Mike Colligan of the Hockey Writers, as well as Forbes Money. And Mike, how you doing tonight? I guess you have to be feeling a little bit better tonight than you were last night around this time, because the Penguins certainly scared everyone a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think this was a time, I thought we could potentially be recapping the season, after how that series went for the first 4 games there. Certainly not looking great for the Penguins. It didn't look bad either, but it seemed like all of those games, with the comebacks and the ebbs and the flows, all of those games could have gone any direction, at least the first four, even part of the 5th game. But it seemed like the Penguins finally settled in the 5th and 6th game. I don't know if it was them getting to their game, as we always hear with the Penguins and Dan Bilesma, but I think Columbus kind of ran out of gas. They really came pretty hard in the first 4 games there. They forechecked hard. They put everything emotionally, physically, even mentally into that first few games there. And I think they eventually just ran out of gas. And I just thought they weren't producing kind of like they were in those early games there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Pretty much all of them you could say were 1-goal games. Game 5 obviously had the empty netter. That wasn't a 1-goal game, but all close games. And we didn't really see much of that in the regular season. Obviously, the Penguins winning all 5 games, and some of them they just crushed the Blue Jackets. But the Blue Jackets, give them credit. They played very well, and they have a bright future ahead of them. Evgeny Malkin, coming out of his slump, if you want to call it, hadn't scored a playoff goal in a while, gets 3 of them last night, and all of a sudden when I checked this morning, he was only 1 goal away from the league leader in the playoffs. So a huge performance there by Malkin, as he scores 3 goals on 6 shots. Good to see him shooting the puck again, as it paid off big time. But Mike, wanted to start off, you had an article about Sidney Crosby, obviously the other guy that a lot of people have been talking about. Malkin and Crosby there didn't have a playoff goal in a long time. Crosby still does not have one. And although he is doing some good things, we're used to seeing Crosby put that puck in the net, and we have not seen that for a long time now. Just talk a little bit about your article here, because clearly something isn't right with Sidney Crosby. I think it's not a stretch to say that. I mean, he's doing some things that we're just not really used to seeing. Obviously, as I said, he's not putting the puck in the net, but we've seen some bad passes at times, and we've just seen him careless with the puck at some points, where he's doing behind the back passes and no one's home and stuff like that. I mean, we're just seeing some really weird things. So what do you think is wrong with Crosby? It doesn't really look like he's 100% healthy. I mean, I know a lot of people aren't at this time, but clearly it's a little bit more than, minor bumps and bruises at this point, right?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. I mean, there's a few elements at play, I think, here where I don't think Crosby's been healthy for probably a month now. For a while, I thought, okay, he's just kind of mentally, physically off his game. He's not playing well. The drop passes that you mentioned, I mean, when he gets a little bit too fancy, and I think that was a problem with the whole Penguins team for a while there, and we've seen that in recent years where they get too fancy. They try to, I think in practice they can get away with drop passes and fancy plays, and you get into bad habits there. And I know there's a lot of criticism for Dan Bylsma and the coaching staff, and accountability is always the word that's brought up. I don't have a good enough feel for it. I know most of the fan base doesn't have a good enough feel for it, but I think, it's something that I know that they get into bad habits throughout the season. A perfect example would be Marc-Andre Fleury, where they allow him to shoot for empty net goals and goof around. And we see what happens then when you get into a critical playoff game. He jumps out of the goal. He makes a mistake, and all of a sudden it's the biggest mistake of his entire career. But those habits are developed throughout the season, and I think that applies to Crosby as well, where throughout practice every single day, those are the types of things that you need to be getting in the right habits so that when you get into critical times you make the right decisions. So from Crosby's perspective, I think he's playing okay. I think he got better as the series went along, but he's not healthy. It's beyond a mental thing. It's something physical that's bothering him. I'm not a doctor. I don't have any inside information on this one, but I can just tell by watching him that he's not 100%. So then the question is, is Sidney Crosby at 60% still better than your next man up on the forward depth chart? Probably, when you're talking about Joe Vitale or Craig Adams. I mean, Sidney Crosby at half strength is going to be better than those guys. And I think he showed in this series where people would look at his statistics and advanced stats and say, he looks great. He's playing well. He's driving possession, whatever that is. He just wasn't meeting the standards that we've come to expect from Sidney Crosby in recent seasons, and especially this season. And I think he looked better in Game 5. He looked definitely better in Game 6. So I think if you're a Pittsburgh Penguin fan, you have to hope that he's finally getting healthy. Uniting him with Evgeny Malkin certainly helped from that perspective. And I think going into a second round, you have to feel pretty good now that they get a couple days off. Maybe whatever is bugging him can get him kind of back to at least close to full strength.
I mean, yeah, you're right. You can't sit Crosby if he could still play, can you? Unless he's losing an arm or something like that. But the playoffs tighten up everybody's game. It makes it more difficult for everybody to score. And a guy like Sidney Crosby or Evgeny Malkin, those guys have unbelievably huge targets on their back every night, especially not just so much in the regular season, but especially so in the playoffs, whenever the Penguins' secondary scoring is going to have to be tested and kind of rise up their game a bit to beat you. Are we seeing a little bit of both of this? Maybe a little bit of maybe something's hampering him, and a bit of people are just playing him really, really toughly, and it's frustrating him.
Yeah, that we've seen that before too, and because you could compare his numbers to Boston last year, where he didn't produce in that series either, and I think you could certainly chalk that up to at least great defense or just not getting the bounces. And that's one problem I have right now with the Pittsburgh Penguins is so many of those goals in that Columbus series were the result of point shots or tips in front, and if you notice, I forget which game it was, maybe Game 5, I think, where they were playing well but couldn't score. And then all of a sudden they, get a critical goal. I think it was Kunitz on the power play where it was a kind of a Crosby shuffled it to the net. Kunitz put it in behind Bobrovsky, and all of a sudden the game broke open. But that game, if there was a bounce the other way, that's a totally different story, I think. And that's the problem is you're never sitting there saying, okay, the Penguins are in control, they're dominating, they're creating offensive chances, quality chances. It's more just let's throw 30 pucks to the net from the point and pray that we get one to hit a skate or a leg or a defenseman. And I think that's a tough way to play in the playoffs. I don't know if that was a result of just Columbus really shutting them down from the quality areas, or the Penguins just not being able to generate the quality chances in kind of the slot area and in the quality areas of the ice. I think we'll find out in the next series here, especially if they would face a Philadelphia or New York, two teams that are probably a little bit better than Columbus, and certainly will test the Penguins offensively as well.
Yeah, they certainly will. And, we talk about Crosby and Malkin. Dan Bylsma putting Malkin up there on the Crosby line, and having guys like Brandon Sutter and Marcel Gottsch allows you to do that, because Sutter was able to jump up on that second line, and center James Neal and UC Jokinen, and that allowed Malkin to go up there. And I thought that was a really good adjustment there from Bylsma to just kind of to shake things up a little bit, and probably could have been the catalyst and made a difference in games 5 and 6, because, if you're Columbus, that is a really, really tough matchup, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Marcel Gottsch, to me, was the key to the series. And it's crazy to say that. He had no points, really didn't produce anything offensively. But to be able to plug him in just gives you such a balanced lineup. And it's amazing how one guy can have that effect on your entire roster. It's not just him plugging in a checking line and contributing, but he allows guys to be in the right spots. He allows them to be in the right roles. And same thing applies to Montreal, where I thought Montreal was kind of out of sync all year, and then they acquired Thomas Vanek from the Islanders, and I thought, okay, Vanek was kind of a big question mark coming out of New York after the trade from Buffalo. Really didn't produce or wasn't reliable, I think, from most perspectives. But what he did was he allowed Montreal to balance out their lineup. He allowed them to kind of get everyone into the right position. If you think back to when the LA Kings won the Stanley Cup, that was the same situation for them, where checking line guys were on the first line, and Dwight King's playing scoring line roles, and it doesn't fit. But all of a sudden they acquire Jeff Carter, they slot him into the right wing and exactly where he needs to be, and it allows the whole roster to really come together. And I think that's exactly what happened with Marcel Gottsch. Bringing him in Game 5 allowed them to at least fill out the roster with guys in the right opportunities, the right positions, and also have the flexibility to then go with Crosby and Malkin on a top line there. And I think Columbus really didn't have an answer. Brandon Dubinsky played great. I think he really broke out this entire season. He was a guy that I saw early in the year, and I couldn't believe this was the same guy I saw in New York, a couple years ago, but couldn't handle Crosby and Malkin on the same line. I think that was a great move by Dan Bylsma. And, we've, again, criticized Dan Bylsma a lot for not being a guy that can adjust on the fly, not being a guy that can come in with coaching adjustments and really be one step ahead in these chess matches in the playoffs. But I think in these playoffs, at least through one round, we've seen, I think, the best performance from Dan Bylsma as a coach.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I thought he was great all series long. We saw him make a lot of adjustments throughout the series, and that was great to see. Mike, I'm kind of asking some specific questions there about specific players, but here's a generic one, I guess. What did we learn about the Penguins in round one? Obviously, we didn't really know what to expect, because the Penguins really hadn't been playing desperate hockey for a long time, probably way before the Olympic break, because they pretty much wrapped up the Metropolitan Division very, very early. In Columbus, on the other hand, they were playing playoff hockey pretty much right after the Olympics on. And so, the Penguins hadn't played much important hockey, and it almost seemed like the Penguins, instead of especially in games 5 and 6, I felt like they really just got their identity, I feel like, and they weren't, trying to mock their opponent or anything like that. Whereas we've seen sometimes where, they take bad penalties and, get into these scrums. And I noticed that they were skating away from a lot of scrums there in games 5 and 6. And they seem to have found their identity, which is very important in these playoffs. And if they can continue to do that and match the work ethic of their opponent, I think that's going to be good for them. And maybe that's one of the good things that came out of this series in facing the Columbus Blue Jackets, who bring it every single shift and a very physical team. And I don't know, just did it feel like to you like that the Penguins found their identity in those last two games?
Yeah, I think you bring up a couple good points there, where it's not a bad thing to play a team that's really just all hard work. Columbus was never going to outskill the Penguins. They were never going to outscore them, or that was a team that just chip and chase, get in there, crush the defenseman, pray that you can grind out a goal. I mean, I think Columbus has a great future, but if there's something that's holding them back, it's that they don't really have that high-end skill to go head-to-head with a team like the Penguins or a team like Detroit even. They don't have those high-end guys outside of maybe Ryan Johansson. It's more, we've got to, put some sweat into this and really, really earn every goal that we get. And I think that's going to hold them back, at least unless they go out in the offseason here and make a couple big moves, which I think, now that they've got their general manager and front office kind of in place, I wouldn't be surprised they're a pretty active team in the offseason now that they've seen that they can get to the playoffs. They've got a good core in place. Maybe now they start to supplement that a little bit and try to take the next step. But I think to answer your question, I think, I still don't have a great feel for this Penguins team. I think it's probably the weakest playoff team that Dan Bilesman's had. Not to say that that diminishes their Stanley Cup chances. I think they at least have as good a chance as anyone. With Boston missing Dennis Seidenberg, I think that's a huge loss for them, assuming he's out for the rest of the playoffs. Huge loss for them. I'd be surprised if they don't really struggle with Montreal this series as well. So I think the East is wide open. That's the fortunate thing. There's probably 5 teams in the West that are better than the Pittsburgh Penguins. And the fortunate thing is the Penguins don't have to face them until the finals. And then whoever the survivor is of that Western Conference gauntlet, you wonder what kind of shape they're going to be in to face Boston or Pittsburgh or even a Montreal in the finals there. I wouldn't be surprised if we see an Eastern Conference team win the Cup, just because no one can go through 4 rounds of just physical crash and bang. I look at that San Jose LA series and I think there's no way that whoever wins that series is winning another round. So I think it's wide open for the Penguins. We'll see what happens here, and I think we'll kind of see that team evolve over the next few weeks here as well.
Now, the big concern I have with the Penguins coming out of this round is their penalty kill. Columbus had 7 power play goals in this series. Time and time again, we just saw Fleury getting screened, and the guy in front of him wasn't getting challenged at all. There were times where Rob Scuderi was getting cleared from his own crease. Why is this happening? How do the Penguins solve it?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know that I even have an answer to that, because I think that's a significant problem for them. Their penalty killing's not great. I would say I expect the Rangers to come out of Game 7 with Philly and New York facing off again tomorrow night. And the Rangers have really struggled on the power play. So I think from that perspective, that's a good thing for the Pittsburgh Penguins. If you think of the Penguins' penalty kill and how many guys it's lost in the last few years, not only Jordan Stahl and Matt Cook and guys that have left via free agency, even back to Max Talbot, but even a Pascal Dupuis, a guy they really expected to be in there, and they've replaced his minutes with Brandon Sutter for the most part. I think Sutter's still feeling his way in the penalty kill role, really not as solid, certainly as much as Dupuis is. And Rob Scuderi, I think, has struggled since the broken leg earlier this year. I thought he was pretty good before that. I'm not willing to write him off completely yet, and maybe I've learned from the Paul Martin experience that we all went through. Mm-hmm. But I think I'm willing to give Rob Scuderi a full offseason, a full training camp, coming in healthy next year. We'll see what happens. If he doesn't get better, then you've got big concerns with that contract there. 3 more years at pretty significant money, and he's really going to be struggling to be a number 6 defenseman, I think. So that's contributing to, I think, some of these holes. Brooks Orpik, even when he's in the lineup, I don't think he's much better than Scuderi. So that's a primary penalty kill guy. So we're seeing this penalty kill unit of a couple years ago that was, always number 1 and 2 in the league, kind of lose some key contributors there. So I think that's going to be a challenge for them. That's going to be a big factor, especially if they get in a series against the Rangers, where it's going to be low scoring. They're going to need to really take advantage of special teams. The Penguins will need to score in their power play. They'll need their penalty kill to step up as well. So we'll see what happens.
Speaking of Brooks Orpik, around the Olympic break, you wrote a really great piece for the Hockey Writers about the downfall of Orpik. Have you seen anything since then that's changed your mind about him?
Yeah, Paul Martin. It's so funny how without Paul Martin in there, Brooks Orpik was, I think, just really, really exposed. And if you're a team that's looking to sign him in the offseason, I'm excluding the Penguins from that conversation because I just think it's not in their style to make that signing. You got to think, what's this guy look like if he doesn't have Paul Martin next to him? Or what's he look like if he doesn't have a really solid guy in his own end that can kickstart the breakout like Martin, can cover for him with speed? Because I think the problem with Orpik is he's regressing physically, but it's affecting him even more mentally. And to explain that, I would say he's been getting beat wide a couple times by speedy forwards. If Martin St. Louis and the Rangers are in the next round here and Orpik's back in as well, you're going to see St. Louis attacking him on the transition game over and over and over again. I mean, if I'm Alain Vigneault, the Rangers coach, I'm saying, let's go after this guy. Let's start sending guys wide and shoot for home run passes and see if we can really get Orpik questioning himself. And that's the problem, is I saw that happen a few times where he got beat and all of a sudden he had no faith in his skating ability. He had no faith in his, gap control, as they call it. And that's, how close a defenseman is to an oncoming forward. Orpik would just back into his own zone, back into his own goalie sometimes, because he just had no faith in his ability to handle these guys with speed coming forward towards him. So it's not only a physical regression, but then the mental games just start to mess with you so bad. And that's where I think a player can really fall apart and totally lose confidence. And again, we look back to Paul Martin, where I wouldn't be surprised he was banged up a couple years ago. I tried to get him to admit it, and he wouldn't. But I think he was hurt that year, and I think it just messed with him mentally, where he got to the point where he couldn't make a play. He had no confidence that he could make the play. And I watched him in Game 6 the other night, and I thought, this guy is so different now. He's making plays in traffic with 3 Blue Jackets hanging all over him that you never would have seen him attempt before. And so it's amazing how much a defenseman is mental, and playing that position is such a mental battle. You need the physical skills, but you need the confidence that you can do it as well.
Now, the 1-3-1 with Brooks Orpik, that's not a real flattering system for him, is it? Especially when you look at the mental side of things. And, I mean, he can't really skate as well as he used to, and if you're hitting those home run passes and driving wide on him, that defenseman needs to be able to skate, doesn't he?
Yeah, well, it depends on which defenseman. I mean, that's where I think it was a move that they did early in the year to cater to some very, very slow defensemen in Brooks Orpik and Rob Scuderi, and even Robert Bertuzzo, if you're talking about kind of the weaker skating defenseman. And the reason that hit me was the Tampa Bay Lightning a couple years ago, were you remember, were probably really using the 1-3-1 a lot. They got all the criticism with the Flyers kind of mocking them openly in a game, and kind of sitting in their own end waiting for the Lightning to kind of come out of that 1-3-1. But the biggest reason the Lightning did it is they had the slowest defenseman of all time. They had Pavel Kubina, who couldn't move. He was basically a road cone out there. Eric Brewer was coming off an injury, really couldn't move himself. Victor Hedman was still a young guy that I think he's improved his skating since then, but at that time was a 20-year-old defenseman that was way too big for his own skates. And they thought, okay, let's run a 1-3-1 where we can stick one defenseman basically back in our own zone. They don't have to worry about dump-ins. They don't have to worry about handling oncoming rushes. They're already starting in our own zone, and when the puck gets dumped in or a rush comes, they're there. They don't have to move much, and I really think, this is my opinion, not necessarily something I've heard from Dan Bilesma or the coaching staff, but I think that was part of their thinking was, let's put a guy like Chris Letang in kind of that 3 of the 1-3-1. Let's make him a pseudo forward, since he obviously likes to play that position more often than not anyways. And let's put our guys like Brooks Orpik and Rob Scuderi back at the blue line, back in our own zone, where they don't have to get beat wide. They don't have to worry about, skating from the far blue line back to their own end and handling Phil Kessel or Martin St. Louis on the wing. I think it's a system and a trapping system. It really plays into the strengths and the weaknesses of the Penguins system, or Penguins roster at this point.
Yeah, some interesting stuff there. And we talk about the defense. How about the goaltending from the Penguins? That was really the big story heading into the series. What was going to happen with Marc-Andre Fleury? And it had been a long, long time since Fleury had won a series as the starting goaltender of the Pittsburgh Penguins, and he was able to do that. Talk about Fleury's performances. I mean, I was very, very happy with him, especially, they lose Game 2 at Consol, Game 3 in Columbus. He gives up those 2 early goals, but still played pretty well after that and allowed the team to win. Obviously, we know what happened in Game 4, his gaffes. It cost the Penguins. He was the best player in that game up until then. Just some major mistakes there. But then he bounces back once again, has great performances in Games 5 and 6. Has to be – that was just really, really great to see Marc-Andre Fleury return to the form that we've seen him have in the regular season. We haven't seen that in the past few playoffs, but boy, it was just refreshing to see Marc-Andre Fleury have a good series.
Yeah, it's funny how he was under the spotlight, yet Sergei Bobrovsky, who I thought was the key to the series for the Columbus Blue Jackets, he really escaped criticism. He wasn't terrible, but he let in some really weak goals. And for a guy that was a Vezina Trophy winner, should have probably been a Vezina candidate this year as far as how he played in the regular season, I thought he would really come through for Columbus, and they really needed him to, and he didn't. But really, I haven't heard his name mentioned at all. I haven't heard a single person really talking about him or how he kind of didn't show up for that series. But Marc-Andre Fleury, obviously the opposite story there, where he's in the spotlight, coming off of the reputation and the playoff collapses. I think Fleury, to me, has been kind of a couple-year project here, where last year in the regular season, I noticed some very, very significant changes to the way that he played goal. Playing much more conservative, playing more compact and I would say efficient in his movements. Very different from Marc-Andre Fleury that you think of maybe 5-6 years ago. Even think back to the first year that the Penguins were in the playoffs, and this is the one that always comes to mind for me, but facing the Ottawa Senators, I think he was in the corner on 3 or 4 of the goals in some of those first games. He was so nervous, and when he gets nervous, he starts to just fly all over the ice. He starts attacking the puck instead of letting it come to him. And we saw that happen last year as well in the playoffs there, where things started to unravel for him. He started to just to chase the puck and try to get there as soon as he could, instead of just letting it come to him, letting him make the save. He didn't have confidence he could do that anymore. So I think he made some adjustments last year in the regular season. I think he's made additional adjustments this year in the regular season, the biggest one to me being his visibility on shots from the point. I thought that was always a weakness of him. And if you really, really watch him, he reminds me of Jonathan Quick now. I don't know if there's a connection there or a goalie coach connection or where it's coming from, but he's adopted the movements, the demeanor, he gets real crouched and kind of has his head wiggling back and forth. It's hard to describe. And maybe I'll throw an article together on it to kind of show what it looks like. But he reminds me of Jonathan Quick now. And if you think of the Columbus series, there weren't any long shots that got by him. And that's usually the case. Usually there's a couple longer shots that Marc-Andre Fleury doesn't see. This series, it was more rebounds and scrambles in front, and I put that on the Penguins' defense as much as Marc-Andre Fleury, where they've got to help him out there. If he makes the initial save and he puts the rebound in a place that's not just right in front of him, they've got to help him out. They've got to be covering guys, and I think you're exactly right where this positive story coming out of this, especially with the Penguins winning, was Marc-Andre Fleury and his ability to bounce back. That's got to just do wonders for his psyche and his mental state, and I think that can only help him because it's not going to be a smooth ride. If they go 3 more rounds, he's not going to be perfect. He's going to have another letdown like we saw. Now he knows he's capable of bouncing back, and I think that's a great thing for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Yeah, it certainly is, and yeah, his confidence has to be really, really high right now. And another guy that seems to be having a lot more confidence these days is Casey's favorite player, Brandon Sutter, who has really just turned it up a notch. And it's unfortunate that he got hurt late in that game last night. Hopefully he's all right. We'll have to wait and see if he's at the practice tomorrow with the Penguins. But, I mean, Mike, I remember, right before the trade deadline, we had talked about the Ryan Kessler talk and how Brandon Sutter was probably going to be the subject of those trade talks going the other way. And it just seems like ever since then, he has picked up his play dramatically, and really, really in this postseason, I thought he was one of the Penguins' best players out there. His point total in the first round already is more than what he had in 15 games last year in the postseason. Talk about his play. And now it just seems like he's really stepped up since those, trade conversations started to come out through the media.
Yeah, I was talking to someone today, and I said the exact same thing, where it seems like right after his name was thrown in every single trade discussion, it seems like that's really lit a fire under him. And I think, we can't ignore that he's also in a contract year. He's playing for what eventually will be a restricted free agent contract, but still, nonetheless, he has to prove that he's worth the big money, and I think he's going to push $4 million. Whether that's with the Penguins or not, we'll see. But I think he's playing himself into at least the question for the Penguins. I thought as of the deadline, there was no way they'd keep him. Now I think he's playing so effectively that it makes you wonder what the potential for this guy is. Now the thing is, he's never going to be above a third-line center on the Penguins unless they would somehow keep together this Crosby-Malkin line. He's always going to be a third-line center. So you got to ask your question, are you willing to spend $4 million on a third-line center? I think that's tough when you consider what you're paying your first to. But from just a Brandon Sutter conversation, a Brandon Sutter question, I thought he played great. I thought his biggest problem during the regular season and probably since he arrived in Pittsburgh was his inability to or unwillingness even to fight through the first contact. He's a guy that the second he knew he was getting hit or he was going to run into a guy, he gave up completely. And to me, that was as a guy that you can see has some skills. He has the abilities. We see what he does in open ice when he gets on, odd man rushes. He seems to convert on 50% of them. Just really wasn't willing to put that effort in and wasn't willing to fight through. And, I think part of it is his name, the Sutter name, makes you think, okay, this is going to be a hardworking guy that's going to play some really effective hockey. And you didn't see it on a nightly basis during the regular season, but I think we've seen it since then. We certainly saw it in the playoffs here. I would love to know who motivated him and who got through to him, because I think that was one of the things I was thinking is, to me, if a guy has skill and it's just motivating him to put a consistent effort in, that's a coaching element. And that's something that if you get the right motivator and the guy that can push his buttons in the right way, you can get that out of him. And I didn't know if Dan Bilesman was capable of it. I think James Neal's another perfect example where if James Neal hasn't gotten any better in the last couple of years that he's been in Pittsburgh, he's really the same player. He's an incredible shot. He's kind of one-dimensional, but I don't think he's gotten any better since he came from Dallas. And with the right coach, though, I think that guy could be the top 5 power forward in the NHL. And I think Brandon Sutter's the same way, where you get the right coach that can push the right buttons there, and every player's different. Some guys like criticism, some guys respond to, support, and they'll shut down if you start to criticize them. A coach has to recognize that. A coach has to embrace that and really figure out what's the right formula for this individual. But I think Brandon Sutter and James Neal are perfect examples of, if you get the right coach, you can get some really great performances out of those guys. And I think we're seeing that out of Brandon Sutter right now.
How much do you think line mates have to do with that? Because last year he spent a lot of time with Cook and Kennedy, and he was having a career year, and this year he's had over a dozen line mates. But then after the trade deadline, he was playing pretty consistently with Tanner Glass. And as you said, he got better after the trade deadline. So how much of that do you think is the reason?
Yeah, you're killing me with these questions tonight. That's a really good one. I would say I hadn't thought of that, but I think that's certainly a factor. I think line mates are huge. The question I would have is, if you're going to pay a guy $4 million, which again is my number I'm throwing out there for Brandon Sutter, can he be a guy that requires good line mates around him to be successful, especially in that role? If I'm paying a guy $4 million, I want him to produce as long as he's got reasonable line mates, but regardless of the line mates that he's got, if you're paying him that kind of money, I think he needs to carry a line as opposed to being a complementary piece. But I think you bring up a great point where he wasn't getting any help, whereas last year with Cook and Kennedy, he's more a complementary piece as opposed to carrying the line. And I think Sutter's a perfect guy to be that extra piece. If he can bring the physical game like he does in the last couple of games here and in the playoffs and down the stretch in the regular season, he's a guy that can carry a line. But it's just, can you get him to put that consistent effort in? That's going to be the huge question. It's going to be I think the $4 million question. And that's going to be the big thing with Brandon Sutter, because the Penguins are going to need that third line element. You see what happens when they have only Crosby and only Malkin. Teams can shut those down. Any team that has 2 pair of defensemen can really shut those guys down when it comes down to it. They need that third line to really be a factor. We saw what happened with Jordan Staal when the ability of them to just roll one line after another that could sustain a forecheck, could establish a cycle game and then create offensive opportunities. That's what makes the Penguins unique. If they only have 2 centers, they're just another really, really good 2-center team. And I think that's what puts them kind of back into the pack of the NHL.
All aboard the Sutter train. Conductor Casey's now taking boarding passes. Who had a train go by?
I don't know.
That was Sutter.
The Sutter train.
That was incredible. $4 million, though, in the next couple years with the CBA and everything in the cap going up, that's not out of the realm of possibility for a third line center, is it?
No, but I think they're going to acquire Ryan Kessler anyway, so I think that'll answer the question. But so in that case, I think Kessler's $5 million or slightly above. But you got to think. I think the Penguins will look a lot different next year than they do right now. Win or lose, even if they got swept in the second round here, I think they'll look very different. I think their defense will look different. I think they'll finally have cap space to fill out those bottom lines. To me, this was always going to be a transition year where the cap was falling. They really weren't set up to compete in that smaller cap arena, and they went all in last year. They gave away their picks. They gave away their flexibility, and I don't blame them. I mean, that was the year to go for it. They came up short. They failed. But to me, this was going to be a transition year for them. I think the Penguins will look much different next year, and I think we'll be surprised at some of the moves that they do make, just because they've got to think longer term now, and this is going to be kind of the latter end of that Crosby-Malkin window, and I think they'll kind of pull out all the stops to make sure that they give those guys the best chance they can to compete for Stanley Cups over the next few years. Because when you look at forwards, usually guys that come in the league at 18 years old, they peak about age 27, 28. So we're not going to see Sidney Crosby get better. We're not going to see Evgeny Malkin get better. These guys are what they are, and you hope that they're better than Sidney Crosby at 0 goals in his last 12 playoff games. But this is the team that they're going to have, and they've got to build around it. They've got to supplement it as best they can, and they've got to take a run over the next few years here because those guys just aren't going to get any better.
Let's get a little hypothetical here. If the Pens did acquire Ryan Kesler, and let's just say he picks up where kind of typical Ryan Kesler would have played, same stats, same numbers kind of thing, no drop-off like we saw with like James Neal, who would have had the better series against the Columbus Blue Jackets, Brandon Sutter or Ryan Kesler?
Think
your name's
hard
not
about
Casey.
this one.
Yeah, easy answers, Kessler. But I'd still go Kessler. I mean, I think Kessler gives you offense. Kessler is an unbelievable player. I don't know how much people in Pittsburgh watch him, but I watched him a good bit. He was their best player this year. That's not saying much on an underachieving Vancouver team, but he was better than the Sedins by far. He was better than anything they had going, and Alex Burrows was nowhere to be found at $4.5 million. So Ryan Kesler was their best player. To me, when I heard Ryan Kesler was available and the Penguins were kind of really, really, really pushing for him, that was a shocker. I thought to get a best player from another team is unheard of in the NHL these days. And I think Kesler provides you offensive upside that Brandon Sutter probably never will. Kesler provides you grit and character and edginess even, if that's the right word, that Brandon Sutter definitely never will. And when I look long-term at, the Penguins, I think walking away from Brooks Orpik, you're going to need kind of that bitter, angry guy. You need to. This can't be a team that just becomes, happy to be here. Let's do some mustache boy breakaway contests, and then we'll see in the playoffs. But they need that. They need a guy that's going to, stand up and not be scared to do it. And I think they've tried to bring in those elements. They've tried to bring in, even Jerome McGinley and Brendan Morrow. They thought those guys were going to be Bill Guerin's and step into the face of Sidney Crosby. And
McGinley's too nice, though, isn't he?
Yeah,
I mean, he has a little bit of that leadership roughness about him, but he's kind of like a big teddy bear in the locker room, it seems.
Yeah, and I think people really underestimate how much of a jerk, I'll use a safe word, Bill Guerin was. He was a guy that Bill Guerin was not liked in every city that he was in. And he's got this, happy-go-lucky reputation now, but he was a guy that was a jerk. And he was totally willing to do it. He would get in guys' faces. He didn't care who you were. And I think to bring him in, and we saw the impact that Bill Guerin had on this young Penguins team where he was willing to stand up and call out every single player that's in there. And I don't think they've been able to find that guy since then. Maybe Brooks Orpik is kind of filling that role. We've seen how he can usually step up when the team's struggling and really call them out. But I think Ryan Kesler is certainly capable. He's a miserable guy. I'm telling you, I've talked to him. He is not a pleasant guy to be around. And if I know Ray Shero, I know Ray Shero is saying, you know what? That's exactly what we need. We need that guy in here. We need a guy that's good, not going to be happy to be here, not going to be happy to lose 3 or 4 games in a row in January. That's exactly what they're looking for.
Sign me up for that. I'm all aboard the Kesler train. I was before the trade deadline, and I definitely would be this off season as well. We'll have to see if that does happen. But Mike, we talked about Brandon Sutter a lot. If he is out, how big of a loss is that? Because I mean, obviously he's played very well, but also you kind of lose the flexibility there. I mean, Dan Bilesma may not be able to put Malkin up there with Crosby very often because he wouldn't have Sutter in the beginning of the series, or how long Sutter will be out if he's out. Now we don't know if he is, but if he is, that could be a big loss in many ways for the Penguins.
Yeah, I watched the injury a couple times. I think it's going to be a knee strain. Not significant, but you never know with those types of things. Every guy has their own pain tolerance as well at this time of year. I think, if you lose Joe Vitale too, UC Jokin is not healthy. I know that. So if we're assuming Sidney Crosby's not healthy either, you're really, really limited at center. And that's going to be critical because the New York Rangers roll about 6 centers. They've got guys out there, constantly they can win faceoffs. Some really, really big guys as well, like Brian Boyle. And you look at what they're able to do on the center ice position. That's going to be a disadvantage for the Penguins. I think they need Sutter healthy. They need Jokinen to get as healthy as possible. They need Crosby as well, and that's going to be the big factor. If those guys are hurt and the Penguins are really, struggling to ice 4 solid center icemen, I think that's really where a potential series with the Rangers could turn.
Yeah, losing Vitale and Sutter would be just awful. Bad for the penalty kill as well because those guys are obviously used down there. Brian Gibbons is another guy. I mean, he took warm-ups yesterday, didn't play in the game, but I guess that could be an option. Just kind of funny because, in the beginning of the year, I didn't really see Brian Gibbons as a guy that would be playing at all for the Penguins this season. But, the last game that we saw him in, he had 2 goals in the, almost 3 minutes that he played. So he's been kind of impressive. So I guess that could be an option if he's healthy too.
Yeah, Giblets. Gibbons. He's
That's a great new nickname.
Giblets.
He's not the long-term solution on the top line there. I'll tell you that much. But interesting guy. Incredible speed. I mean, when I look at him, and I think I want to say he was in Boston College with Cam Atkinson too. You combine the speed of those 2 guys, and it's hard to believe they are on the same line, the same school. Really, really impressive. But Gibbons is a guy that he's very easy to knock off the puck. Crosby needs a guy that can really establish the forecheck, can get in there and help him out, especially if he's not 100%. You can't have Crosby working the corners every shift. And I think we were seeing that too much when Gibbons was on the line. And so I think he'd help. He'd be another guy to add there. You're not going to have a Pascal Dupuis replacement, but certainly would help. But I think Sutter's the key guy. If you can keep him healthy, that at least gives you a couple centers to match up with and also go on the offensive.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens there. But Mike, we saw that Rangers and Flyers head into a Game 7 tomorrow night. I know you picked the Rangers in that one. That's who I picked as well. What do you think that matchup would be like for the Penguins against the New York Rangers? They've played pretty well against Henrik Lundqvist. I mean, you look at the goaltender matchup, you think Steve Mason, Henrik Lundqvist. Probably 100 times out of 100 you're going to say Steve Mason, but the Penguins have been pretty good against Henrik Lundqvist, and they've played pretty good historically at MSG as well. Do you like that matchup for the Penguins? Obviously, they have Marty St. Louis now over there in New York, but what do you think of the matchup there for Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I think as far as tomorrow night goes, certainly it's a benefit to the Penguins to have this series go 7. You're seeing now teams play 3 games in 4 nights in 3 different cities, and back-to-back for Game 6 and 7. That's a huge advantage for Pittsburgh as they sit home and heal up a little bit and face the winner of these teams. Philadelphia, if they would advance, they're a very bipolar team. They're a team that one night looks like they could beat any team in the NHL. The next night they lose 7-1. And I can't explain it. I've watched them quite a bit this year. I have no idea what you're going to get night to night with that team. So certainly capable of winning Game 7, but I think the Rangers are the better team. I think the Rangers match up very well against Philadelphia. And if the Penguins would play New York in the second round here, the few things I would look at are the Rangers are very good through the neutral zone. Really, really, really good solid X's and O's as far as Alain Vigneault coming in and establishing his system and merging it with, I think, what was good about the Rangers to begin with. If you think of John Tortorella's Rangers and how well they played defensively and blocking shots and limiting opportunities, that hasn't disappeared. And I think that's the key is when a new coach comes in, you can't try and reinvent the wheel. You can't try and change a team to fit what you think is right. You've got to work with what you got. And it takes so long to build up a roster of a certain type of player. You can't just ignore that and all of a sudden try and, change a system like Washington did, where they build up all these high-flying Russian European players, and they say, okay, let's trap and try and block shots. I mean, to me, that was just idiotic from management's perspective and coaching as well. You've got to work with what you got, and I think that's what Alain Vigneault's done. Is he's worked with what I think is a very solid defensive team, a team that's built around Henrik Lundqvist. Obviously, they limit opportunities, and that would be my one concern for the Penguins. Is what I mentioned earlier, where they're a team in that Columbus series that was producing offense off of let's throw 30 shots at the net and pray we get 2 lucky bounces, or let's wait until we get 4 or 5 power plays and cash in on a couple of those. You're not going to always get power plays. You're not going to always get the lucky bounces. And when that doesn't happen, it can be a couple games until it kind of turns your way. And I think we saw that in the Boston series, where the Penguins threw all kinds of good chances at Tuukka Rask and the Bruins, but the Bruins were limiting their quality chances. They were taking advantage of the opportunities that they got, and that would be my concern if they would face the Rangers, is the Rangers would really, really lock them down, keep them to the outside there, and we'll see what happens. But I think I would give the Penguins an advantage in a series against the Rangers. I don't know if they can handle Boston. I really don't know if they can even handle Montreal if they would get to the third round, but I guess we'll take it one round at a time.
Yeah, we certainly will. I have the same questions with Boston, Montreal. With that Game 7 tomorrow night, 2 other ones in the Western Conference. What are your thoughts on these ones with Colorado, Minnesota? Zach Parise had a great game in Game 6. Nathan McKinnon has been very impressive, the rookie for Colorado. And then L.A. and San Jose. Boy, I mean, I thought San Jose takes a 3-0 lead, and all of a sudden here we are, 3-3. L.A. with 3 unanswered wins. They're going to go to a Game 7. Who are you picking in those ones? Those have been some pretty entertaining series out there in the West.
Yeah, 2 very different series, I think. We're in the same place, but you look at Minnesota and Colorado, back and forth in that series. Certainly, it seems like the home team kind of has the advantage, but for me, Colorado losing Barry on defense and a couple other injuries as well. They've gotten Duchesne back, I believe, so that certainly helps, but that's really hurting them to not have an offensive defenseman like Barry moving the puck for them. I think that's really been getting them pinned in their own zone quite a bit. We're seeing the shot totals really in favor of Minnesota in most of those games. And so in that sense, I'm starting to think Minnesota has the advantage there. When I look at the LA San Jose series, I mean, it's tough to go with San Jose at this point with 3 games in a row going LA's way. They got some fortunate situations last night, but they're playing great hockey, and I think that series should have never been 3-0. Really, Jonathan Quick not being on his game and playing what he's capable of. But if I had to pick a team, I think I'm going with LA there. And to me, that would just be gut-wrenching if you're a San Jose Sharks fan. I mean, that team is just they get criticized so much, yet they've always been in the playoffs. They've always advanced a few rounds. They've just never really gotten to the finals or the Stanley Cup championship year. But a great core there that's always there, and I think this would kind of be the final nail in the coffin, at least for this generation of Sharks. A lot of young guys coming in there, but if they would lose this, I think it could really do a mental thing for them where they say, the hockey gods are against us, and we really just can't get it going. So I think that's the one I'm tuning in for is LA and San Jose. I think that'll be a great Game 7, and you couldn't ask for more as a hockey fan to kind of see those teams battle it out with all the physicality, all the scoring that they're capable of, and we'll see how it plays out.
It should be a lot of fun as we will finally know the opponent for the Penguins tomorrow night after the Flyers and Rangers game. Mike, thanks again for coming on the show tonight. You were great, and hope to talk to you again soon here.
Yeah, sure thing, guys. Happy to, and we'll see what happens over the next round or so here. But like I said, I think the East is wide open for the Penguins. They could lose this round, or they could win a Stanley Cup at this point. So I think if you're a fan of the game, fan of the Penguins, certainly you couldn't ask for too much more year in and year out.
You certainly couldn't. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Sure thing.
Let's get out of here.
Let's get out of here.
Let's get out of here. Let's get out of here.